Those of you who are visiting with us by video this morning, we're glad to have you. Whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, we're glad to have you with us. It's been an interesting week. Interesting, that's one of those words we use when we don't know what else to say, right? Kind of a vague word. Let me say it differently. It's been a powerful week. There's a particular event that is on my mind pretty heavily this morning, and it's far too much to say just in one sermon, but I want to acknowledge it, and I want to tell you how I see the connection between this particular event and what the Lord is saying to us, how He's calling us forward as His people. The event that I'm speaking of was the verdict that came out earlier in the week. It's been a year, almost, that many around our country have been waiting. They've been waiting longer than a year. They've been waiting for decades. But they've been waiting for a year to hear the verdict that came out. And frankly, I've been waiting, not like they have. Don't misunderstand me. I don't in any way mean to compare my experience to so many others. But there has been a longing, there's been a waiting for a verdict that represents truth, a verdict that represents right, a verdict that represents an upholding of good and not a condoning or a looking the other way of evil. I'm speaking, of course, of the verdict that came out with former officer Derek Chauvin. And I know that this event has been politically charged. It's been taken advantage of. It has been wept over, and so on and so forth. But I want to mention it to you this morning for a very personal reason. Personal for me, personal for many others. Seeing something by video is not the same as being there in person. I get that. But I also know that for the first time in my life, other than in a movie or a TV show, I watched one person be responsible for another person's death. I watched it happen. And I struggled with it. I don't know either one of those two gentlemen. I know a little bit more about them now than I did before. But frankly, it didn't matter to me. What I watched, without knowledge of why, was a man subdued already and a person in a position that I have counted on all of my life as being one who works for the right and the good, one who gives their life, and I greatly respect, for the work that they do to keep me safe, to protect my rights, to call forward those who have done wrong to be accounted for. Our society is built on things like this. It has separated us from many, many other countries around the world today and throughout history. And to watch that happen was deeply disturbing to me. Again, I didn't have any of the reasons why. I didn't know any of the background. And I don't mean to tell you that I am against every killing that occurs. There are instances that are of a different nature where maybe it's self-defense or there's not another option or any number of other reasons. So my point in bringing this to you today is not to say I'm against all police actions. It's not to say I'm against all killings, although I know the Lord does not want us to take the life of another, as a general statement. But to watch a man who's face down on the ground with his hands tied behind his back and multiple people on top of him already, every indication is he is subdued. And then to watch what occurred and to see the look on the face of the one doing it, it reaches deep in places in me that I've not been in touch with in a long time, and that is a bent for justice and a bent against injustice. And there's a danger with that. I want to acknowledge that right up front. There's a danger because I'm not perfect and I don't have all wisdom. And anytime you begin to enter into wanting justice or wanting injustice to be righted, you risk putting yourself in a place of judging or deciding what is right for others. And I'm aware that I don't have the wisdom to make all those decisions. Still, there was something deep in me that said, without any other knowledge, just what I was watching, this is not right. This is deeply not right. And as I've listened and watched and paid attention to the various voices that have been speaking about this for months, and I'm aware that there are groups of people in any society that are privileged and there are others that are not privileged. I recognize we're not different than those other countries. We have the same in our country. But we have a calling to be different. We have a calling as Americans because it's part of what our country is built upon. But for those of us who say we follow Christ, we have a deeper calling, a longer lasting calling, because while I have no desire whatsoever to see America end, I'm aware that the possibility exists. But as one who follows a raised from the dead Lord, there is no end to his kingdom. And so his calling on my life and on your life doesn't end. And that calling is to care for one another out of the same love that he has for us. A love that we can't match, but we're called to follow. We're called to do everything we can in our power and to ask him through his power to enable us to do what he's called us to do, and that is to love one another. And love means care. You can't do one without the other. And caring for one another inherently involves a cost, because you can't care for another person without it costing you something. Now, maybe it's something really easy. Maybe it's something as simple as, hey, you need $10 for lunch. Yeah, okay. Did that cost me anything? In my case, no, not really. But it did cost something. So even in such a lightweight case, it costs something. But we're not talking about $10 for lunch. We're talking about real caring and real love for those who desperately need it. And there are a lot of people in our midst that desperately need it for a lot of different reasons. Reasons I can't explain, reasons I don't even fully understand. But what I can understand is this: every single one of us has needs. Every single one of us is in a place of needing another, because none of us can provide everything we need all by ourselves. And inevitably, in a place a planet full of people who are plagued with selfishness and self-centeredness and a tendency to get caught up in what's best for me, inevitably somebody else is going to get hurt, even if it's unintentionally, as I pursue my own good, let alone those situations where I'm not just pursuing my good, but I'm pursuing it intentionally at the cost of another. Then there's a step farther than that, or a step further. And that step is one that others have commented on. This is not original with me. But the more I've thought about it, and the more I've looked into the eyes of the officer, former officer, looked into the eyes through a photograph, I see what others have called worse than hate. And that is a look of apathy, a look of a lack of care, a look of, I'm just doing this and I'm not even aware. Again, my point this morning isn't to go all morning long and go deep, deep, deep into this. I want to acknowledge it for you and for anyone who happens to watch by video or anyone you happen to talk with, because I want to acknowledge how deeply disturbed I am at any incident when a wrong like this is committed. And I want to acknowledge that there are problems in our country that are more than just one-on-one. We as a country have a long way to go in making sure that we uphold the values we as Americans have, let alone those values we as Christians have. But it's our calling. And we have to be determined to fulfill our calling, which is good for all. I bring up the apathetic look because in my mind it froze me in my step when I heard that description and I looked at the photograph and the look on his eye, in his eyes. And it penetrated me deeply because I'm of the privileged class in many ways. I don't bemoan that. Frankly, I thank God for the privileges that I have, for all the benefits that I have, because men and women have worked very, very hard to provide for me in the things that I have, and I acknowledge that. But I also acknowledge that there are others around me that don't have the privileges I have. And I'm not advocating everybody have all the same thing at all the times. There are governing forms that have tried that and they don't work. But our system has need for improvement as well. And to bring it back around to why we're here this morning, the one who has my allegiance beyond this country demands it. He demands it. It's not popular to use language like that. It's not popular to use demand or command any longer. You know, don't tell me. You feel free to do what you want, believe what you want, but don't tell me. You don't have a right to get my business. Well, you can take that before the cross and before the Lord, just as I'm called to do. And frankly, it's another sermon for another day, but I think we need to spend some time on that, folks, because I think we've gotten too far away from the fact that there is right and wrong, and there is truth and justice, and there is one who has all authority in heaven and on earth and has given us commands. And we need to honor that. And so as a man of privilege, when I recognize a fellow man who has less privileges and even those inalienable rights are taken from him, I'm challenged deeply to ask, as a man who thinks and cares and acts, have I been thinking and caring and acting on behalf of those less privileged? Not because of a political movement, not because of my allegiance to the country, although both of those might be enough motivation. But again, because the one who I call Lord, the one who I credit with saving me from myself and giving me the opportunity for eternal life, has called me to this. And because it is his vision for a new world, it is a vision for the new creation that he gave up his life to begin. We're just a few weeks from Easter, the single most important and celebrated event in the life of every true follower of Jesus ever. We're just a few weeks off from it. And to have such a monumental event that I have let it just kind of end, that I've just kind of moved past it after a week or two, most of my life concerns me. I don't let other big events just go by so quickly and become forgotten. So I return to it again this morning. The one who is risen, the one who is resurrected from the dead, the one who is exalted and given all authority in heaven and on earth as the Lord, acknowledged or not, matters greatly to me. And therefore I need to pay attention to what he says. And in John's Gospel, in the 10th chapter, he says some pretty significant things. He talks about his role as the good shepherd, the one who cares deeply for those he's given authority over. He speaks passionately and personally about his love for the sheep that are a part of the flock that he's given to care for. And once again, he speaks of his willingness and in a prophetic way, what would become his actionable sacrifice for their benefit. In verse 11, he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I know most of us deal with sheep, and most of us don't know shepherds. But I suspect this story is so simple and so easy to understand that I really don't have to explain to you what's going on in this. I don't have to explain to you the difference in an owner and the difference in somebody hired to take care of sheep, because you own other things and you know what it's like when you hire somebody to watch over. Inevitably, you care more than the one you hired to do so, even in a good situation, and I'm not knocking hiring people. But let's face it, when we're hired to do something, we're doing a job. When we own something, and maybe owning is the wrong word when I speak of a parent and a child, when they are yours, you care differently. You sacrifice more willingly. You pay attention to what they care about and what goes on in their life more because your deeper affection for them, your deeper affinity with them. This is what Jesus is saying, but he's also intending to say for us what comes next. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus is trying to get us to understand, he's spoken of God, his Father, before, of an intimate relationship and a significant motivation for what he does. He is doing what he's doing because of his Father's will, his Father who sent him to do what he's doing. He speaks of that in other places, not only in John's gospel, but in the other gospels. He is sent to do his Father's will, but it's not just an obedience act, it's out of love. It's out of an intimate knowledge of each other and knowing what is good and right and just and knowing what is desired from the essence of their being. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, this is how I know my sheep. Think about that for a minute, those of us who are Christian. Think about how Jesus and God the Father know each other, well beyond our capability of knowing. Think about that kind of knowing. And then Jesus says, I know my sheep like that, and they know me like that. Talking about an intimate knowledge. I mean, I know my wife. I know my parents. And I don't have children of our own, so let's just call those three as the closest relationships I have on this earth, and I know them, and they know me. I have an idea of what it means to know someone and to be known by them. And Jesus says he knows me in that way, and he knows you in that way. And that you, if you're a follower, if you're a sheep, know him in that same way. Do we know him in that same way? Wow, what an opportunity. And then he says this, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. Jesus is telling this story to the Jews, the people of God, the people that he was one of, the people who were around him. He's telling this story to those who he had relationships with. Those who were part of his flock, those who were part of the flock of God, those who had had long relationship with God, those who were supposed to know God better than any other because they were his people chosen. They were the people he revealed himself to. They were the people that he lived intimately with, his presence with them, so they would know him and he would know them. This is who Jesus is talking to and telling this story. These are the sheep in the fold. These are the sheep in the sheep pen. And yet he says, I have other sheep not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. And I can't help but remember why God called, and we've talked about this numerous times in here, why God called the people in the first place, why he called a chosen people to himself, not just to exalt them and bless them and say to everybody else, ha, don't you wish you were part of them? No, he called them in order to have the relationship with them so that everyone else could see and that they could witness who he is and everyone else would have an opportunity to come to him. So God the Father has intended for everyone else all along to be invited in. But he needed a particular way to do it. He needed a way to let his presence be seen in the relationship of people and the change he had on the people who were his and followed him, so that others could say, oh, man, can I be a part of this? And I think of the little kids, that say, hey, I'd love to be a part of your family because of what they see. So to bring this back around, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. And I've been challenging you in this room, those of you who have been coming regularly. I've been challenging you for a long time now. We must be about those who don't know him. We must be about blessing others with the blessing we've been given. We must be about welcoming others to him. We must be about giving of ourselves that others may see and welcome the opportunity to be welcomed into his presence. I bring it up in light of the events of this week, or what was represented in this verdict, and all the things that maybe are associated with it. Friends, it isn't just one police officer. It isn't just one group of officers. It isn't just a government. It isn't. It is so much larger that it is, in fact, a significant portion of why we have this story. It is because the God who created all of us loves each of us and wants desperately for every single human ever to know that he and she are welcomed into his presence and welcomed to be one of his own. And we have a significant calling to help them become part of that. Now, we can't choose for someone. We can't make someone decide. But we can love them in a way they have not been loved before. We can show them love from a group of people who have been radically changed. And when we do so, when we love like that, people notice. When you love like this, sacrificially, people come. Not to our group necessarily. Maybe. They're welcome. But it's much bigger than that. It's coming into Jesus and his kingdom, his family. People often wish preachers would relay or apply the Word of God to their lives more specifically. I don't know of a more particular, specific application of God's Word than this. If we want to live in a society that honors all people, if we want to live in a country that upholds certain rights for everyone, if we in fact ourselves don't want to lose the rights that we have so benefited from, perhaps we should look to the one above and listen and follow. Because the opportunity is tremendous and lives really are at stake and can be changed. Lord, I don't